A week ago, we had a guest on Rising who told us exactly what the media is clueless about whenever it comes to rural voters. And now that the votes are cast, we wanted to circle back to see how voters outside of cities fared this election.
George Goehl, director of the People's Action and host of the To See Each Other podcast, joins us now to give his overview of what we know about the 2020 election results. At least it's so great to have you back, George. Thank you.
Good to see you, George.
Good morning.
So you come at this from a progressive lens. You've been organizing and doing deep canvassing in rural communities, and rural America continues to overwhelmingly shift towards backing Republican candidates. What do you make overall of these election results? What are maybe some of the positive indications, and what are some of the missed opportunities?
I mean, on the positive front, tens of millions of rural Americans voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and that shouldn't be written out of the story. And then I think on the looking in the mirror, we're 10 years into a populist moment in this country that many Democratic candidates just fail to embrace. And people know somebody is taking them to the cleaners, whether that's pharmaceutical companies, the big banks, health insurance companies. And honestly, most Democrats fail to name the villain in the story. And everybody talks about narrative these days. Well, narratives need villains and heroes. And there are villains in the story. These are true culprits of what's wrong in the country. And if you're not willing to name them, the other side's going to name them for you. And they will name immigrants, people of color, Muslims, big government. And actually, I think most of the rural voters we talk to are I don't trust somebody that's not willing to say to me, yes, somebody is responsible for this, and I'm going to go fight them for you. So I think until Democrats fix that problem, there's going to be a lot of struggles in rural communities.
Yeah, it's really interesting, George. Let's assess some of the votes in particular. I mean, I think it's fascinating that you can see, Trump won Union voters, for example, in Ohio, 56-40. He won in the Rio Grande Valley with Latinos in Texas. He won Miami-Dade County, Cubans. Those are all kind of the more famous ones. But just across the board, rural and white working class voters turned out at historic levels for Donald Trump. And the gains that you were trying to make there with many of these rural voters and others didn't, at least I think it's fair to say, probably didn't work out. Why do you think that happened from the Biden-Harris messaging?
Well, I think first, Democrats, progressives have no infrastructure in most of these communities, have written them off for decades. There's no organizing in rural communities, actually not in small cities or medium-sized cities like Kenosha. No infrastructure. We are not in relationship with people. We are not having a conversation with people. People don't know who we are and what we stand for. And until you fix that, you're going to struggle because people are trying to make meaning of why their conditions are declining in America, how the country is changing. And if we're not there to inform that meeting, the other side will. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but one of the things we've seen over the last few years is things like this. The flyer that got sent to me from an organizer in North Carolina. It said, "Are you struggling with addiction? It's not your fault. We can help you." A really loving, benevolent message. At the end of the flyer, it's the signatory, the White Knights of the KKK. So you got right-wing groups, you got right-wing Republicans, you got the KKK out in these communities trying to organize. And progressives and Democrats have basically written these areas off at our own demise. And I did not hear, Vice President Biden ever mention rural in any debate. I didn't see a strong rural agenda. And I think until you fix that, people are you're not on my side, and I'm not going to go with you. To me, does it make sense that then you pick Donald Trump? No, but because of the populist moment we're in, you've got to understand where people are at, speak to their anger, speak to the fact there's a villain that needs to be held accountable, and I think things will get better.
What would that messaging look like? I know one of the things that you told us that blew me away last time is that when you show up at the doors, pre-COVID, of course, 80% would name corporate takeover of government or corporate influence on government as a villain. And yet you really don't hear that messaging much coming from the Democratic Party. And in fact, those who are bold enough to make that message are sort of shunned. They're sort of pushed off to the corner oh, you can't say that. That's way too out there. That's way too radical. What is that populist messaging that's consistent with Democratic Party or progressive values that you think would land in rural communities with the understanding, look, when you've written a community off for a long time, when you kind of look down on your nose at them and treat them with contempt, it takes a long time to build that trust back. How could they begin to? Because this has massive implications, not only for the decent policy results that we get in this country, but in terms of if the Democratic Party wants to be able to have power and push an agenda effectively across the country.
Yeah, ruralorganizing.org did a poll that showed strong support for corporate accountability messages. This is a poll that was sent out to about 8 states and rural communities. People are seeking more of a message around holding pharmaceutical companies accountable, holding health insurance accountable, and want to see a politician that's going to go toe-to-toe with them. There's a reason that we see like amazing energy around Bernie Sanders and his message, around AOC and her message, and Donald Trump and his message. And so I think the problem really is, let's be honest, and you guys know this as well as anybody, like big parts of the Democratic Party are too close to those institutions to be able to say that. I don't know if they believe it or not, but they're actually not willing to say it. Until we are actually really honest with people, folks are not going to believe us. And I just think the Democratic Party's got to reckon with the fact that like populism is here to stay until people's material conditions change.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, we really appreciate your insight here, George. Thank you.
Thanks, George. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Next on Rising, Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He returns to talk about that imminently tight vote count when Rising returns.